How did ancient craftsmen build over 8,000 life-sized warriors without modern technology? The secret behind the Terracotta Army, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is an ancient assembly line so advanced it rivals modern vehicle factories. Here is exactly how they were sculpted, baked, and detailed over 2,000 years ago. We tend to hand Henry Ford the credit for inventing mass production. In 1913, at his Highland Park plant in Michigan, Ford set a chassis moving down a line and had each worker add a single part as it rolled past, and the modern industrial world was born. Yet more than 2,000 years before that line ever moved, an emperor in central China was already building an army the same way. Standardized parts, divided labor, and a catalog of components assembled into thousands of finished bodies against a brutal deadline. And this ancient factory pulled off something Ford's line never could. Ford's genius was sameness. 1 million cars, built exactly alike. The factory we are about to walk through did the opposite. 8,000 soldiers came off a production line, and no two of their faces match. What we are really chasing is how you build a machine that turns out an army of individuals. The answer is far stranger than the legend of the lone master sculptor, and it starts in a dry field with a man digging a well. In March of 1974, near the village of Xiuzhen in Lintong district, outside the city of Xi'an, a farmer named Yang Jifa and his brothers were digging for water in the middle of a drought. A few feet down, their tools struck a head of fired clay staring up at them out of the soil. They had punched through the roof of a buried pit, holding thousands of life-sized warriors that no living person had laid eyes on for over 2,000 years. What they had found was part of the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor, a necropolis that would eventually be designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987. The man who ordered them was Xiuzhen, who in 221 BCE finished conquering the rival kingdoms of ancient China during the Warring States period, and crowned himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. He wanted an army to guard him in death, and he wanted it fast, because he was aging and consumed by his own mortality. The Han historian Sima Qian later wrote that more than 700,000 laborers worked on the emperor's tomb complex, though most scholars now read that number as covering the entire 22-square-mile necropolis rather than the warriors alone. Either way, the demand was impossible to meet by hand. To fill those pits on time, the Qin could not afford to sculpt. They had to manufacture. And before we head underground, it is worth remembering that the assembly line has a much longer history than the slogans let on. The shipwrights of the Venetian arsenal could float a galley past a row of stations and fit it out in a single day, using prefabricated, standardized parts. That was a genuine marvel of efficiency, and it arrived roughly 1,700 years after the pits, outside Xi'an, were already running. The principle behind every factory floor, standardized interchangeable parts assembled by specialists, was not born in Detroit, or even in Venice. Its oldest surviving monument is an army of clay. The scholar who decoded the logic of that army worked at Heidelberg University. His name is Lothar Ledderose, an art historian, and in his book 10,000 Things, published by Princeton University Press in the year 2000, he set out the principle that runs through the whole of the Terracotta Army. He called it the module system. It is the same idea that drives a modern plant. You never build each object from nothing. Instead, you make a limited kit of standardized, interchangeable parts, then combine and recombine them to generate endless variety out of a small set of components. Ledderose traced this same pattern all across early Chinese making, in the casting of ritual bronzes, and even in the writing system. where thousands of characters are built from a small stock of repeated strokes and parts. For the Qin, mass production was never a one-time trick. It was a way of seeing the world. A warrior, under that system, is not a sculpture. It is an assembly. The feet and the solid lower legs were built first, as a stable base, formed much like the heavy clay drain pipes these same workshops were already turning out. On that base, the workers raised a hollow torso, stacking it upward in coils of local clay. To toughen it, they beat the inner walls with wooden paddles to force out the air and pack the clay tight, and a single figure could climb only about 4 inches in a day, because the soft body would slump under its own weight if anyone pushed faster. There was no skeleton inside, no armature, no frame of any kind. The warrior balanced on nothing but itself. The arms were made on their own. So were the hands. The head was shaped separately too, and dropped into the open collar of the body only at the very end. What stands in the pit is not one carved man. It is roughly 7 major components, joined with wet clay, slip like mortar, the way a car is bolted together from parts that arrived from different stations. And the torsos were not even all unique. Researchers find they came in only a handful of standard types, dressed up by the armor and the stance layered on top. The horses tell the same story, since the cavalry mounts and the chariot teams were assembled from standardized parts as well. A whole stable mass produced right alongside the men. If you have ever stood in front of these soldiers believing each one was hand-carved as the portrait of a real man, take a second to subscribe, because the truth runs exactly opposite to the legend, and the way this ancient line manufactured the illusion of 8,000 separate individuals is the most ingenious part of the entire story. A real factory does not just standardize its parts, it standardizes the raw material flowing in, and recent science shows the Qin did precisely that. Patrick Quinn, an archaeological scientist at University College London, studied thin slices of the warriors under the microscope with his colleagues, and found the clay was mixed to a consistent recipe, prepared at a central source, and deliberately cut with silica-rich sand to open the dense paste so it could dry without tearing itself apart. A later study from his team ran portable chemistry scanners across reconstructed figures and turned up something sharper still. The statues carry a faint chemical fingerprint that separates the work of the palace workshops from the work of the regional workshops near the old capital. Many separate workshops were running at once, in parallel, each drawing on its own clay supply, all of them feeding the same line to the same standard. Even the timber that fired and framed the project tells the industrial story. As the local forests were stripped bare, the supply shifted to distant high country woods hauled in from far away. This was no workshop. It was a supply chain. So if the bodies were standardized and the clay was standardized, how on earth do you end up with 8,000 different faces? This is where the line performed its real magic. The faces were not carved freehand, and they did not come stamped from a single mold either. The workers began from a limited repertoire of basic head types, then individualized each one by hand, pressing on the ears, building the hair up into a top knot, shaping a mustache, opening the eyes a little wider, or setting the jaw a little harder. The proof hides in the smallest detail of all. Andrew Bevan and his colleagues at University College London made 3-dimensional scans of the ears of dozens of warriors, and they found that no 2 ears were the same, varying as widely as the ears in any real human crowd. Ears are nearly as individual as fingerprints, and the only way to get that kind of variation is by hand. So the genius was a hybrid, a standardized, mass-produced body, finished off with a human face. Once a figure was complete, it moved to a final station and was painted head to foot in bright color. Henry Ford would later run this same assembly logic to make millions of cars that were all alike. The Qin ran it in reverse to make thousands of clay men who each look like somebody real. The deepest proof that this was true mass production is not in the clay at all. It is in the bronze the soldiers were holding. Marcos Martinon-Torres and Xiuzhen Janice Li, working between University College London and the University of Cambridge, studied the tens of thousands of bronze weapons buried in the pits, among them roughly 40,000 arrowheads and the trigger mechanisms of the crossbows. When they read the chemistry of the metal, a pattern surfaced. The arrows came in tight batches, each bundle poured from one melt, the arrows of a single quiver sharing one chemical signature, while the next bundle carried a different one. And the crossbow triggers, the intricate moving heart of the weapon, were built to such a uniform standard that a trigger from one workshop would drop into a mechanism made by another and simply function. Interchangeable parts, more than 2,000 years before that idea would come to define Western industry in the armories around the year 1800. The same precision turns up in the two bronze chariots unearthed near the tomb in 1980, each one assembled from more than 3,000 separate cast pieces. This was manufacturing, at a scale and a tolerance the ancient world is simply not supposed to have reached. Here we owe Henry Ford a little honesty, because the real story beats the headline. Ford's specific invention in 1913 was the moving line, the belt that carried the work to the worker. The Qin had no conveyor. What they had was everything else mass production stands on: standardized parts and interchangeable components, a division of labor spread across specialized workshops, and a catalog of modules assembled into finished goods. All of it was coordinated by a state that, under the earlier reformer Huang and the legalist philosophy he imposed on the Qin bureaucracy, had already standardized its weights, its measures, and its tools, and had forced individual craftsmen to answer by name for the quality of whatever they made. On the ground, the day-to-day logistics of the tomb complex fell to Li Si, the first emperor's prime minister, who coordinated the supply chains and the labor across the entire site. The Qin did not beat Ford by building his belt. They beat him to the far older idea that a government could turn thousands of separate human hands into one repeatable machine. Even the firing was industrial. Quinn's team showed the warriors were baked in controlled kilns rather than open fires, because only a managed kiln could hold thousands of these fragile giants at over 1,700 degrees Fahrenheit, evenly enough to keep them from cracking apart. And the whole operation ran for the better part of 40 years, until the emperor died and his dynasty collapsed, leaving the line stopped in mid-production, some figures finished, others still waiting. So step back and look at what these pits truly are. We came in asking how a few ancient workers could build over 8,000 warriors without a single modern machine. And the answer has nothing to do with magic, and everything to do with organization. The Terracotta Army, spread across Pit 1, Pit 2, and Pit 3 of the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor, is not an art collection. It is the oldest factory floor on Earth, frozen in the middle of a shift, a parts catalog and a standardized clay supply and specialized stations and interchangeable bronze, with one final human touch that handed every mass-produced body its own face. Henry Ford built a line to make 1 million things that were exactly the same. 2,000 years before him, the first emperor built a line to make an army of individuals, then sealed them in the dark to guard him for eternity. The machine worked so well that the soldiers are still standing. There are other secrets buried alongside them, why the bronze blades came out of the ground, still bright after 2,000 years. with researchers debating everything from ancient chromium treatments to the natural chemistry of the burial soil. What colors truly covered these men before the air stripped them bare? And what lethal thing still fills the sealed tomb of the emperor himself? Rivers of liquid mercury poured from cinnabar, the one no archaeologist has ever dared to open. Those are stories for another day. But the first secret, the one the assembly line has been whispering across 22 centuries, is the simplest and the strangest of them all. These men were never carved. They were built. And somehow that makes them more human, not less.